All right. Who were your friends at school?
There's a fellow by the name of Paul who lived about a block and a half away from me, and when I went to junior high and high school, I was very close to him, and we did a lot of things. Prior to that, there were some other kids. I had mentioned earlier the kid that lived through the block from me. His name was Jim. Jim's father was a dentist, retired, but he was a big outdoors person. And in fact, he was one who his father had founded the very first Boy Scout troop in Utah. And I got to go camping a lot with them when I was younger. But in high school, when I was in junior high and for a couple of years, I had a bunch of my friends in the spring. We would get work doing sugar beets, thinning sugar beets. I had an uncle who worked for the farm employment office, and I would call him up at night and say, okay, we're ready to go. We finished this job, and he'd say, well, Farmer Smith will pick you up at the junior high school at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we would work for Farmer Smith for 2 or 3 days till we got his beets thinned, and then I'd call my uncle again and get another assignment. And I did that for 2 or 3 years when I was in junior high school. With, I was essentially the crew of my friends and thinning sugar beets.
Who are your favorite teachers?
Probably my favorite teacher the one I remember the most was my 4th grade teacher, Miss Hewish. Then in high school I took mechanical drawing, and I liked the mechanical drawing teacher whose name was George Cheever.
Do you remember teasing or bullying of you or anyone else?
Oh yes. Yes. There was a fellow that lived up in our neighborhood whose name was Robert, and he was a short fellow. He was a nice kid. He was short, and I teased him a lot from his shortness. And I can remember one time in junior high school, we were out doing a gym class, and I picked him up and turned him upside down. You know, like kids do.
Yeah.
He turned around and hit me in the mouth. I didn't bother him anymore.
Yeah. That's funny. What were your favorite subjects and other interests?
Well, I liked the sciences. I ended up taking every solid subject that was offered in the high school, except for zoology. But I took biology and chemistry, physics, all the math that they taught, mechanical drawing, and I studied trigonometry on my own. I got a trigonometry book and studied that in the evenings.
What were your least favorite subjects?
Oh, probably English and history.
What were the different groups at your school? Which did you belong to? How do you think you were perceived by others?
Well, I got senior year in high school, I got an award by the Bosch and Lomb company for the outstanding science student in the school. I wasn't really big enough or strong enough to be an athlete. I did go out for football my sophomore year, but I was just too little. So I focused in on the sciences. I had one Christmas I received a chemistry set and a microscope kit, and I set up a little laboratory in our basement. But the one thing that I had, I guess I was 10 or 11 when I got an erector set, which is it was a big box, a small suitcase full of pieces of metal that had holes drilled in them, and instruction book on how you could build things. There was a motor, and I built a car, and one of the things in there you could build was a parachute jump, which ended up being taller than I was.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of, I was just into the mechanical things. And when I was in high school, the biology teacher more or less made a comment that he didn't think anyone in the school would be able to design and build an apparatus to measure the contraction of a muscle, frog's muscle,
Mm-hmm.
if it's stimulated by electricity. So I took the personal challenge and using the pieces for my erector set, built a little device that would activate a solenoid when the muscle was shocked. Well, I used the solenoid to simulate a muscle, and I hooked it. I had built a graph, this drum that would rotate, and a pen that would swing back and forth like a lie detector
Mm-hmm.
when the solenoid was activated. And I took that to the state, ended up taking that to the state science fair.
Mm. Cool. Are you involved in any extracurricular activities, and what were they?
There weren't a whole lot of extracurricular activities available in high school. Of course, there's athletics. No, I really wasn't involved in any extra
Mm-hmm.
things.
What were your plans when you finished school?
At that time, this was in the early 50s, it was right at the height of the Cold War. For kids graduating from high school, there always looming ahead of them was military. You either would have to enlist in the Reserve or the National Guard, or face being drafted.
Mm-hmm.
There was that option or that thing. There was college, and then there was an LDS mission. And depending upon who you were talking to, people would approach those with different sequences. Myself, I joined the Army Reserves when I was a senior in high school, and 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, myself and 3 of my high school friends were off to Fort Ord for the Army for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of that 6 months, I came home. It was at Christmas time, started in a college at BYU, and went there this fall, the winter quarter, winter semester, what it is now. Then I knew that I would be of age in the fall to go on a mission. So I put in my papers and served an LDS mission to Sweden for, at that time, foreign-speaking missions were 2.5 years. So I was gone for 30 months, which put me back home in the spring. And then that fall, I enrolled in BYU again, and then got married and moved to Salt Lake after that first year.
Mm-hmm.
Because the girl that I married was teaching school in Salt Lake at Skyline, and it was easier for me to transfer to the U than for her to find a job in Provo.
Mm-hmm. How did your relationship with your parents change when you became a teenager?
They expected more of me. My father, in his employment, worked construction, so he was gone a lot. He would work in Wyoming and Idaho and all these places. And, most of the time he would leave in the Sunday night and drive up to wherever he'd be working, then come home on Friday night or Saturday morning. So I essentially had the responsibility of helping my mother take care of the house, feeding the cattle, or the pigs and the cows, and milking the cows, and taking care of the garden and what have you. When I mentioned the garden earlier, as I mentioned, I think it was about the size of half a football field, and there was an irrigation water, and everybody in town would have a schedule in which they would have the water. We had it for an hour, and that hour would rotate every 7 days and 6 hours. So every 4 weeks we were out watering the garden at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, when my father wasn't home, that was my responsibility.
At what age did you begin dating, and what kinds of activities did you do on dates? Describe your first date.
Interesting question. I was probably what you would call going steady with a girl when I was in 7th grade. There were 4 of us, 4 guys and 4 girls, who would go out and just run around together. And when I say run around, that's what it was. We would walk. This girl that I was dating, her name was Deanne, and she lived on the other side of town from me, and so I would have to walk down to across town to pick her up. Paul, whom I had mentioned earlier, the girl that he was dating at the time lived on the path, so he and I would, and the 4 of us, the 2 of us would go down, and I would drop him off and he would pick up his date, and I would walk 6 more blocks and pick up mine and come back up and join up with them, and then we met with 2 other couple, and we would just walk, go to a movie, go to a drive-in. When a drive-in, I mean a restaurant, and get hamburgers. When I was in high school and I had a car, I figured that I could go on a date for $5. A date I could buy 2 hamburgers, 2 shakes, 2 movie tickets, and gas for $5.
That's nice.
Most of the things that we did on dates were go to movies or play tennis or bowling or things like that. Just the same things that kids do now. School dances.
Where did you go to college?
Well, as I mentioned,